I want to start out this morning's sermon with a chemistry lesson. There's no need to worry, though. It won't be too painful. I want to talk about something called a catalyst. When a chemical reaction takes too long to happen, sometimes you can add something called a catalyst to speed up the process. For example, let's say you wanted to make some common, ordinary water, some H2O from hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. You'll be waiting a long time if you just mix the two gases together. But if you add a little bit of a silvery white metal called palladium to the mixture, you can speed up the process. Of course, there's another way to create water, and that's simply by filling a room with hydrogen gas and oxygen gas and then lighting a match to the room. But it's probably not the safest way in the world to create water, because the explosion that results from it can do an awful lot of damage to both the room and the person holding the match. But before we leave our chemistry lesson, I want to tell you about one more thing called inhibitors, or negative catalysts, which work in exactly the opposite way as catalysts. An inhibitor will slow down a chemical process instead of speeding it up. Now, with that chemistry lesson under our belt, let's turn to today's account of the only one of Jesus' miracles that occurs in all four of the Gospels. In each Gospel, Jesus sees the crowd of more than 5,000 people. He has compassion on them, and he feeds them with just 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. But only John's Gospel says they were made from barley, not wheat. Barley was cheap and low quality, and what a poor person would have eaten. And only John's Gospel mentions that the 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish belonged to a small boy. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the how did it happen part of the miracle. Some folks would say that when the disciples began walking through the crowd asking if anyone had any food, the people were unwilling to share what they had. But when everyone saw the little boy offer up the 5 barley loaves and 2 dried sardine-sized fish he brought for lunch, their hearts were moved to a place of generosity. And when they pulled out their own lunches and shared what they had with their neighbor, there was even food left over, as anyone who has attended an after-worship potluck social can attest. The boy's generosity then acted like a catalyst. He was the special element that, when added to the mixture, caused a reaction to take place. His own generosity produced within the crowd an outpouring of even more generosity. But there are others who would say that's not how it happened at all. They stand firm in their belief that there were only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish in the crowd. And when Jesus took the bread and gave thanks for it and broke it, then the fish and bread miraculously multiplied until there was enough to feed everyone, with 12 baskets of leftovers taken up afterwards. If that were the case, then we can compare Jesus to the spark of fire that, when added to a room filled with oxygen gas and hydrogen gas, or in this case some fish and bread, produced explosive results. And whether you believe the miracle was in the transformation of the 2 fish and the 5 loaves of bread into enough food to feed 5,000 families, or you believe the miracle was in the transformation of thousands of strangers coming together in trust as a community and sharing what they had, there's room enough in this church for both interpretations. But since I've spent some time comparing Jesus and the young boy to a catalyst in a chemical reaction, it's worth our while to take a look at the negative catalysts or inhibitors in the story. You'll remember that inhibitors act in just the opposite way that catalysts act. They slow a process down. In our story, both Philip and Andrew act as inhibitors. Philip can't see beyond the financial constraints that exist when he points out that not even with 200 days' wages could we buy loaves enough to give them a mouthful. And we see the scarcity mentality of Andrew when he asked, what good was 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish among so many people? Had it been left up to Philip and Andrew, we never would have read about the miracle because it wouldn't have taken place. And so the question for us today is, when we are invited to be participants in a miracle, will we act as the catalysts or as the inhibitors? Will our faith and generosity contribute to the process, or will our attitudes of doubt and scarcity slow it down, possibly even stall it out completely? As a church, when faced with a ministry opportunity, it's easy to find ourselves acting like inhibitors. Like Philip and Andrew, a quick scan of the church's financial report reveals that there just isn't enough money in the budget to accommodate the proposal. And our human resources are already stretched thin. We're a small church after all. Expecting people to give more or do more just isn't realistic. But I like what Nadia Bolz-Weber has to say about the matter. Every parable about God's kingdom, every teaching Jesus had about how God creates something glorious starts with something small. Never once did Jesus say, the kingdom of heaven is like a Fortune 500 company with super happy shareholders. It's always something small, insignificant, easily overlooked. These are the things that reveal the glory of God. She goes on to say, I just know for myself, and I've seen the same thing in many of you, that we look at the smallness of our offering, at the insignificance of our abilities, the inadequacy of our treasure right up against the need, and we think it's a reason to feel shame. Or we act as though smallness, inadequacy, and insignificance are things that would never be worthy to bring to the throne before God. If left to our own devices, we can project our own sense of inadequacy onto the church. And when faced with a ministry possibility, we treat it more like a problem that must be dealt with than an opportunity to participate in God's kingdom. And that's why it's so important for us to hang out with each other. A community of faith transforms us from inhibitors into catalysts. We remind each other that in God's kingdom, mustard seeds grow into great trees, and ordinary water is turned into the finest wine. In God's kingdom, those who serve sit at the head of the table, and messiahs ride on the backs of donkeys. And in God's kingdom, when the little bit that we have to offer is combined with the little bit of other people, there is the potential for great things to happen. So as we take stock of our resources, both personal and corporate resources, I hope we can find encouragement in this morning's story that reminds us that God transforms our small acts of compassion in ways that can feed the spirits of more people than we will ever know. Amen.